One of the most important aspects and key aspects of the solar plexus is boundaries. Now, first, I want to say that our sense of boundaries is something that we start to develop in our sacral chakra. Because if you remember, that is where we start to learn about relationship dynamics. So boundaries, of course, are definitely a piece of the second chakra. That's where we start to understand them. And again, if you remember from the last module, it's a place that sometimes we will just self-abandon, or in other words, not necessarily have boundaries. We can learn how not to have boundaries sometimes. But it's once we get into our third chakra, again, we're looking at sort of ourselves in the greater sense and the way that the world sees us. So sometimes having boundaries can start to get a little bit more complex because we want to make sure that we are seen a certain way. And so whether we adhere to our own personal boundaries or we don't, there's a relationship to the way that we are being seen. Now, if we have learned that having boundaries is something that actually has a negative impact, let's say, if in the second chakra development, say you're younger and you're at home and someone says something to you at home or does something that doesn't feel good, and you let them know that, and the next thing you know, maybe there's a fight or someone gets in trouble, and then, it can sometimes make that connection to boundaries as being, ooh, I shouldn't have those. And so we learn early on, some of us, that we need to shut those down. That's something that will often be illuminated in the third chakra as we develop relationships in the larger world, and even with who we think we are supposed to be. This is, we talked about shoulds in the root chakra. That's really where the context of where the shoulds come from are born. We start to play those out in our third chakra. And shoulds and boundaries are extremely close. They're very well connected to one another. So one thing that I find really interesting about boundaries in general is that when we start to develop them, and I'm definitely sort of generalizing here, but I've seen this so many times, it's hard not to. Once we understand that, we need to start having healthy boundaries, oftentimes it's because not having boundaries has failed us long enough that, we realize we start to get to that point of, I can't self-abandon anymore. Not having boundaries is not good for me. I need to start tending to myself more and caring for myself more. It's often because, we've had some kind of breakdown, if you will, in something that's really important to us by not having boundaries. So what the next stage of development and boundaries often looks like is sort of what I call sharp boundaries, where it's a very sort of defensive, protective, no, you can't do that to me. No, how dare you? This is my boundary. You're not allowed to do this to me. There's a very forceful, very sharp kind of energy to it, which makes sense, because those of us who have not had good boundaries, which is definitely a part of my story, have learned that we've been taken advantage of, or that we have been sort of bulldozed over, or we have been hurt by people in our lives because we have not had those boundaries. And so our initial inclination is to go into protection or defensive mode. So again, that makes sense. But unfortunately, what I see with this a lot of the time is, we often don't go beyond that. And that's something I want to talk about here, because I haven't seen a lot of people with what I understand healthy boundaries to be. In fact, in the therapy that I had, some years ago, for many years. And through many of my clients, I haven't heard the transition into the next stage of what a healthy boundary is. And it's probably one of the most important aspects of having boundaries that there is. So what healthy boundaries actually are, once we've sort of gotten over that initial phase of, feeling like, okay, I can protect myself now in this stance of self-love and wanting to tend to myself. Boundaries are us telling the world who we are. That's what a boundary is. A boundary is actually not, or a healthy boundary, I should say, is actually not us defending or protecting ourselves. That's not to say that there aren't situations where that is true. If you're in a toxic or abusive situation, sometimes we need those very harsh, very strong, more angry, no, this is not okay. Without a doubt, there is a place for that. But as a way of living, when we're talking about healthy boundaries and having healthy relationships and just healthy relating, whether it's in our personal relationships or our relationships in the larger context of the world, our boundaries are quite simply our ability to know ourselves and to be really clear about who that is within those relationships. So all of a sudden, if something doesn't feel right, it doesn't have to be that sharp boundary. It doesn't have to be that almost like, piercing no. It can be, that really doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. Or, that just doesn't feel right for me. I think I'm going to pass on that. Just very clear, very gentle. Yeah, that just doesn't align for me. And when we are able to simply know ourselves and show up as we are, boundaries become a lot easier. And it's not a conversation, or it's not a situation where we are essentially polarizing ourselves with other people, which is often how we perceive boundaries to be, especially when we're being defensive. But boundaries, if you remember from the root chakra, when we talked about blame and victim, it's sort of this us versus them. When we come up with our boundaries from that defensive place, we're actually sort of in that place of an underdeveloped root chakra where it's us versus them and I need to protect myself. When we are standing in our healthy boundaries with just the clarity of knowing who we are and just living from that place, we are not polarizing anyone. We're not making the case for it's us versus them. We're actually finding a way to connect with other people more because we're being clear about who we are and we're not making them wrong. We're not asking them not to be who they are. We're just simply saying that doesn't align for me, and so I'm not going to do that. So when we come from that place, it is incredible the amount of flow that we can feel, just flow within ourselves, flow of energy, flow of connection, because this is the boundaries is often a place where the energy can really get blocked or really leak, depending. That's more of a personal energetic field sort of conversation. But when we're working with boundaries, we really are looking at significant energy blocks and leaks when we're not coming from this centered place of this is who I am, which is the way that we have all of our energy here. We have our energy in present time. We are not self-abandoning. We are self-nurturing. We are giving ourselves what we need for ourselves, and we're not asking for someone else to give that to us. So and by very nature of this, we are in a truly empowered place where we're not taking anything away from anyone else, and we're actually doing something that's totally and completely supportive of us, of another person, and of the relationship as a whole. I'm Katie Bray. Thanks for watching. This was just one segment out of 8+ hours of videos that I have available through my energy architecture course. You can preview an hour of the 8th chakra. It's linked below for you to watch for free. There's other energy architecture videos that you can watch just right over here.